One second.
Good night, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, and welcome to the Consciousness Festival 2020. My name is Elliot. Welcome, everyone. Today is our much anticipated Tobago and Jazz History Workshop. The Black Consciousness Festival is a global online platform for the commemoration, celebration, and sharing of vital histories and stories that boost the awareness and impact of pride, power, and practice of people of African descent. The festival is building awareness around how each of us can take the necessary steps for restitution and reparation. We introduce to you our facilitators for this amazing cultural activity, Tobago and Jazz History. Zayla is a musician from Tobago who uses voice, piano, and Orisha spirituality to create greater room for reflective and mindful living within and against contemporary systems of enslavement. Zayla has done performance lectures in several places, including Texas University at Austin, as a 2017 performing artist in residence, and in Morocco in 2018 as a musician linguist. Justin Cargier Peterkin is a multi instrumentalist with a lifelong passion for professional music from Mount Grace, Tobago. He has performed the Tobago Jazz Festival, the Summer Solstice Festival in Michigan, the London Arts and Music Festival, and cultural exchange programs in Israel. Zayla and Justin are joined by Kashif Joseph, who has played with them for more than 20 years. He has over 12 years experience in electric guitar. He is an educator and a lover of all things musical. This performance lecture will expose Tobago's musical legacy beyond the more commonly known sounds that have come to characterize the island's musical heritage. Using the examples of jazz and sacred music, the discussion and musical demonstration will address Tobago's history in the business of jazz and sacred music making and performing in the 20th century. We join Zayla, Justin, and Kashif as they take us on this musical journey. We are ecstatic to have you all here tonight. Welcome to the Black Consciousness Festival, and thank you for sharing with us your expertise on Tobago and jazz history. Over to you.
I'm lonely. Why have you seen me? I'm all for you, body and soul. I spend my days in longing. For you I cry, for you I'm Swala-la-dee-da, swadiba. Sydney, shandala-lupa, yalla-da, yellow, sada-la-la. Body and soul. They often think about Tobago as this kind of backwater place, somewhere choked behind some lamppost, some mountain in a corner. Oftentimes when Trinidad and Tobago is represented, the word Trinidad is given, Tobago is an echo. The country is almost never represented as Tobago and Trinidad. But I am a serious advocate for Tobago, and one of the things I want to share with you this evening is the way in which Tobago has always had a very eclectic music legacy. And we're not just to be reduced to the cliched songs of folk music, soca, calypso, reggae, etc., which are ours and proud. We're proud to, own them and claim them. But we have so much more. And that's one of the things we want to share with you this evening. In fact, there's a writer from Tobago whose name is Susan Craig James, and she has a 100-year history covering Tobago from 1836 to 1936. And in that book, there is a chapter that is entirely dedicated to the music legacy on the island. And one of the things that she speaks about in that chapter is the way in which Tobago has always had a very rich jazz legacy from as early as 1926. In fact, when the Robinson Crusoe show was filmed in Tobago in 1926, and the Tobagonians were asked to do a dance. It is written in that book that the Tobagonians who were asked to do the dance did the eccentricities of jazz and the Charleston dance, which happens to be my name, right? And in the 1930s onwards to the 1950s, we had about 6 established jazz bands on the island that moved around the island, that moved around Trinidad and Tobago, and that also moved around the different Caribbean islands doing music. Out of that jazz tradition came a number of other kinds of music. The band that I came up in as a musician happened to be the parents and uncles and whatnot of Kashif. And we did music that emerged from the jazz tradition, the Negro spiritual tradition, the gospel tradition. And because Tobago is also such a very Christian environment, the average musician in Tobago comes through the church tradition, and therefore once you come through the church tradition, you almost bound to come through the jazz, the Negro spiritual, the blues tradition. There is, of course, something to say about how church limits and restricts the expression of jazz and blues, etc. But all the same, the training, the training in that kind of music or in those kinds of musical innuendos really comes from the church. And that is something that Susan Craig also points out in the book, because we had quite a lot of village competitions on the island during the 1950s, which was one of the bases for the musical legacy in Tobago. So a lot of folks come to the island and expect to hear good soca and calypso, etc. But if you talk to Kashif, you talk to Justin, you talk to me, you talk to the band that I was a part of, which is as I said earlier, Kashif's parents and uncles, etc. They will tell you that a number of very excellent musicians not just came from Tobago, but have gone on in the world to do very sophisticated things and are not known as Tobago musicians. Mm-hmm. So one of the things we want to share with you this evening is the variety of what Tobago has to offer and the quality of our sound. All right?
jazz in itself has always had a misnomer of where its history has come from. Not too many are aware that jazz, on a whole, came from the African diaspora,
That's right.
right? It started way back on West Africa when we had our society's griots.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the people that would walk around, they would travel, and they would tell tales using musical expression, juxtaposing it to the European condition of music and its popularity. They were more focused in Europe on the combination of harmony, right? And forming structures. While in Africa and West Africa, they were busy at this pre-birth of jazz, ignoring structure, right? Using freedom of expression to create an art form that speaks more to just entertainment, but becomes an integral part of society, right? They use permutations and rhythm, an African rhythm, as a big deal because they see it as another form of communication, right? For them, it's a lot more than just being able to express oneself. It's culture, right? And so it plays a huge social role. And the reason that we can experience it here today is because of the chain of events that led from it leaving the shores of Africa uh, through the Atlantic slave trade. And they were traveled through the Caribbean.
Mm-hmm.
People were dropped off, people were picked up, right? Eventually, we ended up in the States, in a town called New Orleans, where now we have a melting pot of people from all over, right? All over Africa, as well as all of these, all the way from Brazil, coming up the islands, all the way to New Orleans. So we have a melting pot of all these different cultures, but they're shared amongst the people that lack the ability to, lack the platform to express themselves. So what did they do? They gathered in a place in New Orleans called Congo Square,
Mm-hmm.
and that was the birthplace of freedom,
Mm-hmm.
right? And art was the catalyst, right? Jazz, right, was the medium that they choose to use, right? Where it used to be all the way back from Dixieland, we would have virtuosic clarinetists, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, Pianists. They would come together and they would. There was no need for us to rehearse in advance. Why? Because every time we played, it's going to be different everywhere,
Mm-hmm.
right? I like to liken it to what we do with language, right? Because remember, a lot of these people, their language itself was one of the stuff stripped from them, right? So here they are with this massive culture shock, but this innate desire for expression. This is how jazz came to be. There was the development of ragtime, right? Ragtime, where they would all play along Dixieland. This all, this is in the 1920s.
Mm-hmm.
It pushed forward where it became popular, right? Even despite the social issues that caused it in the first place, right? And so they um, even at work while they were slaves, they used music, jazz, right? The what will later become known
Become
as jazz
jazz, right?
because it wasn't jazz to them at the time. They would use that in the fields just to help them get through the day,
Mm-hmm.
right? Through the workday, they would sing amongst each other, right? Sacred songs, right? Spirituals, Negro spirituals, right? They would start doing chants, right? They would, even if it's just humming, they would all do it as a community while working to help them push through, right? Spirituality was a big thing, and they used the music and all to connect with that. When they started to diversify from the sacred music, um, we have the blues, right? The blues was their form of still using this medium of expression, but outside of the Amazing Grace,
Mm.
right? Or a lot of these songs were also written in such a way where it was much more than the lyrics, right? Because there were a lot of stuff they were allowed to say, a lot of stuff they weren't allowed to say. And so the music said what they couldn't say, right? You'll see clever lyrics, clever, right? On the surface, it just sounds like what it is, right? Except they would hide even in some of these sacred lyrics, they would hide their
In fact, the
expression.
Negro spiritual
Mhm.
is a political genre
Exactly.
in its own right, because when they sing about Jesus, it wasn't quite about
It
Jesus.
wasn't.
It
No.
was about escape.
Exactly, escaping,
Escaping and all
to
that.
northern lands.
That's right.
So you would think that they're talking about, oh, I'm gonna be going up to Zion to be with my Lord, but honestly, they were talking about
Getting
moving to
away.
Chicago
Exactly.
because they heard that they could be free in Chicago.
Exactly.
Right, and so blues became a standardized form, and around this time we have greats like Scott Joplin. Right, he was the pianist. Around this time we had Louis Armstrong. Right, and they pushed, even though in spite of the social issues that still limited them on where they could perform, when they could perform, with whom they can perform, why they can perform. All of this were limitations that they continued pushing through, even though it was jazz, just for the sake of not giving up that link of expression they have, and that link of wanting to be free and a part of something that they can't physically grasp. Right? So this was them reaching out to their culture as they know it. To them, it was innate, right? Jazz was pop at that time, right? And jazz being pop, as in the genre of pop music, lasted up until the 1950s, right? Because around the 1950s is when they decided that they wanted to push uh, the genre even further, just like what the Renaissance did to music in Europe. I see the 1950s as that period for jazz music. It was when bebop just
Coltrane and all these
yes,
fellas.
Coltrane, Dizzy Gillespie, these people were birthed,
Charlie
and
Parker.
yes, and it became away from the simplicity, right? Of what they would do before,
Even
right?
dance
Now, of
genres.
course, there was always much skill required to play this music, right? But they started to diversify from playing these music that requires high skill, but still pleasing to the white folk that they're playing it to, right? So they started to play in such a way that would just show their virtuosic ability, right? That was the birth of bebop. And even bebop advanced past with guys like John Coltrane and went to hard bop, right? It went to avant-garde, big band arrangements, which is where a group of 20 or 30 of them would come and do arrangements by people like Duke Ellington. They exploded in this era and they took over, right? The Charleston was a dance that was done in swing, right? And so they pushed forward and continued to push forward. At that time, jazz started getting replaced with rock
and
disco, right? When it got to the 70s, in
That's
the late
right.
70s was when disco took over from jazz and rock as being pop. But they continued using their cultural expression um, even throughout their diaspora, right? Even while they were still in these same social situations, they began to use it as a way of political commentary.
That's right.
Because in a lot of ways, it felt like they were being robbed of a voice, even though they were a member of society, right? And so they continued to use jazz not just for entertainment, but it became their way of social commentary on the world that they live in. And because of that, we can now experience as jazzers, and we continue the legacy of griots, where we
Correct.
continue to tell our story, right? Make sure
Correct.
that our story is told using the avenues, using jazz
Correct.
as expression. It's freedom of to improvise.
Correct.
And we continue to use that freedom to improvise to say our story in a unique way that connects all the way back to our heritage from West Africa.
I think very important about what you said is this business about how West Africa and the Caribbean influenced what the world has come to know as jazz in the US. So one misnomer is, of course, that jazz belongs to the US.
Exactly.
And that's not by any means true. Jazz belongs to all of us in the
Yes.
diaspora. Each island has its own history of jazz. And importantly, what is experienced as jazz in America is in fact a diasporic experience.
Exactly.
It's not an American experience. It's an out of America experience that found form and shape in America, you know? So I suppose with that, Justin, you could probably give us a
Sure.
demonstration of a very known jazz standard.
I will.
Yeah?
This song is called on Green Dolphin Street. And it is itself, if you would go look up the lyrics, you'll realize that it itself is commentary.
Commentary.
It is commentary, and they used it with this expression. So here we go.
Thank you. Um, so one of the important things about Tobago and Tobago's legacy in music is that um, one can only know what we have when one is in Tobago. Or of course, if there is a Tobago musician that's elsewhere and the person identifies as Tobagonian, you're going to get a sense that that's a Tobago musician. But you really get to know about the value and worth and talent of our musicians when you're on the island, intermingling with community. Um, what we have demonstrated so far are different examples and songs of the jazz influence. The first piece was, of course, an improvisation on Body and Soul, which is a famous jazz standard. The piece that Justin just did is also another jazz standard, famously done by I know Miles Davis did that.
Yes,
right?
yes, he has.
And I think Coltrane, if I'm not mistaken, did a
The other
version of that.
it, yes.
Um, and the piece that you heard from Kashif and Justin is Kashif's own composition, which is the next thing that we're very known for. We compose, and we compose, in my estimation, some sophisticated pieces. All right. Justin also composes like I do. And this last piece is one of my compositions, which really talks about, well, it brings Harriet Tubman, that's that runaway slave, runaway enslaved woman, back into picture and brings her back as a living spirit. The character in this song is somebody who is very depressed, distressed, tired, and weary, and is looking for some help. And one morning in his dreams, Harriet Tubman comes to him in the dream. And the rest of it will be told in the song. All right. This one is more, I would say, synonymous with the Negro spiritual tradition. There is some jazz influence in it, but as Justin pointed out, the jazz family is a very large one. There are lots of sub-genres that emerge out of that. So the ragtime would have been an early incarnation of jazz before jazz became jazz. But the Negro spiritual was also an earlier incarnation of jazz, as it was an early incarnation of the blues as well. And what now we understand as sacred songs or hymns in the Black Christian tradition are really extensions of Negro spiritual songs, right? Yeah. Another thing I needed to point out was that the blues music, the blues melody, is well, the blues is a very wide branch of music as well. But there are certain blues melodies that are equally applicable as gospel melodies. All right, you hear people like Aretha Franklin or Nina Simone, even Dina Washington. Some of the musical, the piano work is very heavily gospel as it is equally heavily blues. So that's one of the things that we wish to point out as well, to show how elastic the influence has been on us. All right, so I'll do that last piece, and then we could chit chat a little bit. So tired. So weary. body, oh, set me free. One morning, oh, an old lady, she came to me. In my dreams, telling me, boy, I know sometimes you get so lonely, but she said to me, boy, breathe on, keep on running into belonging. In other words, she said, breathe, breathe. She said, come along. Oh, one more that old lady I love. Sister Harriet Tubman, she was that old maid. Yeah, she came to me in my dreams, telling me, boy, I know what you're going through. Yeah, 'cause I lived. She said to me, boy, yeah, yeah, come along. Indeed, said, listen to the melody, boy, breathe and come along, yeah. Settle down, oh, yeah. Oh, breathe. Oh, come along. Ashley. So that's all we have to offer from Tobago. Um, and we hope the session was educational, edifying,
Yes, yes.
and moving spiritually. Ashe, back over to you.
This has been a phenomenal session. We have learned so much about Tobago and jazz history. So, I'm a musician that plays jazz, and it was interesting how you connected the various influences throughout the diaspora to this wonderful genre.
Thank you.
Tell us, in your opinion, what aspect of Tobago's musical history has influenced the rest of the Caribbean?
Can you repeat that?
In your opinion, what aspect of Tobago's musical history has influenced the rest of the Caribbean?
Well, I mean, I will rely on this cliche, which is Calypso Rose. All right. I mean, we all know who she is and her influence. But one of the significant things, I mean, when I was back at UWI teaching in the gender studies department, one of the things I often made reference to was the fact that MacArthur Lewis was the individual who gave us the Calypso monarch. That phrase, those words, the Calypso monarch, was on account of MacArthur Lewis. And you look at a number of female performers throughout the region, you know, that very bouncy style that Calypso Rose had on stage. The swinging of the mic, the taking off of the shoes. You see quite a lot of that in different artists, the names of whom I can't immediately recall. But certainly there is, you know, you see what I would call a Rose aesthetic in quite a few female musicians throughout the region and elsewhere. And, you know, there is also that this question was posed to me some years ago in a different way. And I suppose I'll also try to answer it how I answered it then. Again, you have to know what and who is a Tobago musician and how we function to actually get a better sense of how we influence and how our influence spreads, right? Justin here, for example, is an alumni of Berklee College of Music, and he has played with many people. But I don't know if Justin actually says that he is Tobagonian or if he identifies himself as Trinbagonian, right? So the influence that he has as Tobagonian will only be identifiable and known when he identifies himself as such and talks about it, right? So that's perhaps another way to think about how you know, aspects of Tobago's musical culture have extended themselves elsewhere.
Yeah.
Has that helped?
Yeah. Even as you mentioned Calypso Rose, I remember I was in France, right? And normally I have to tell people I'm from Trinidad and Tobago, because if I tell people, oh, I'm a musician and I'm from Tobago, they immediately get lost. And I have to like draw a map in their head and tell them, yes, you see that little rock off the coast of, but in France was one of the first places where I said I was from Tobago, and they immediately knew. They knew. and that was because of Calypso Rose's work there, right? You know that she got the highest award
Of
right?
course.
From their president, right?
That's right.
And she continues to do work with them
That's
and
right.
continues to get awarded. And she has been one of our many cultural icons that continue to push what it is to be from Tobago and be an artist,
Correct.
right? Not just musician, what it is to be an artist and to express yourself from that unique taste of what it means to a Tobagonian.
Correct. Calypso Rose also has albums where the lyric is given in Tobagonian, which I find is particularly important because oftentimes when we think about, when we talk about a national language, we often tend to hear the Trinidad
Literally
Creole
speak, yep.
as the national language. And, the Tobago Creole, again, is pushed aside and, shoved to the corner and only really picked up by those who can speak it, right? And there's it's stigmatized in a particular way. But Calypso Rose, being Tobagonian, and if you understand how Tobagonians think, it is a natural, flow that the dialect, the Creole, the dialect as we say here, will naturally be a part of her storytelling in the lyrical dimension of the song, So I mean, we can talk about influence on a very wide basis, but of course, time wouldn't allow us to get into all the nuances of that. I'm not sure if that helps answer your question.
Yes, that was very good. So, what do you think about the Black Consciousness Festival, and can you elaborate on its importance?
Right. Um, so I am thankful to be a part of it. Honored to have been to be reached out, and this, happened in short notice. So we're grateful to have been a part of it. I still these days have, I mean, I know what the application is, but I still have my own conflicts with the term blackness, because it so sets up whiteness. And once we set up whiteness against blackness and blackness against whiteness, it's difficult to get out of those hierarchies. That's my issue. I understand the application. So I mean, I would love to be a part of an event or a festival that's called the African Diasporic Consciousness Festival, you know. So we could encode our Africanness in a different way and not necessarily always hide behind blackness. That being said, though, it is I think it's the right kind of event to get involved in right now, given the tenor of things outside. We have people who just don't want to go home after they've lost. Just go home, but they're not going home. And that refusal to go home, it breeds a whole different kind of species. And I know what I am talking about, right? So the thing really is that it is the opportune time to inject spirituality and spirituality from from the geography of blackness, from the geography of the African diaspora, into the vibrations of the world, because I mean it's a watershed moment, and each of us needs to do what each of us can do. So I think it was the right thing to get involved in. And
Yes.
well, Sean knows me very well to know that I don't do these things very often. So when I said yes, it's because I thought it was, a good thing to get involved in.
Exactly.
And of course, asked Justin to be a part and Kashif to be a part of it.
You're right. Even when I heard of the festival, I said I did my research and I was so pleasantly surprised at what it offers,
Right.
that I was more than happy to be a part. And I'm really glad for the opportunity. And it's because we're playing catch up, right?
Exactly.
We in a whole, we're playing catch up. And it's because of festivals like this where we can begin to recreate bridges that we eradicated before, create new platforms and avenues where we begin to first know ourselves, right? Because it's only upon that collective introspection can we really understand the position that we're in. And only from understanding the position that we're in can we create an effective and realistic map for how to get us to a place where we will thrive, right? We're not yet at that thriving place, although a lot of my fellow friends are complacent because they act like as though we're in that thriving place, but no, we're not. And so I'm glad for a festival like this that really pushes, right? It really creates an avenue for people to explore themselves, explore links that
And find
might have been
themselves, right?
lost in the
Correct.
past, right? Maybe you didn't know it all. Maybe you had an inkling, but you this is its way of flourishing,
Correct.
right? And so knowledge is power, right? It's
Correct.
cliche, but it really is,
Correct.
right? And so
Correct.
I'm
I
glad to
mean,
be a
and
part.
coming from on the heels of, you know, all those killings and whatnot in the US, Black Lives Matter movement, etc. I mean, one thing I would like to say is that they're killing us all over the world, not just in America, even here. You don't have to be white to have prejudice against blackness. You could be very black and dislike blackness. You see? So on the heels of all of that, for me, it's important to be involved in vibrational energies that push towards a different direction. That should answer your question.
Understood. So, gentlemen, we are so grateful for your presence and contribution. We appreciate you all being here today and sharing your knowledge on Tobago and jazz history. So thank you again for the great info and musical vibes.
Very, very
Thank
welcome.
you. Thank you so
very
much.
welcome. Thank you for having us.
Thank you to our viewing audience for joining the Black Consciousness Festival's Tobago and Jazz History Workshop. And thank you again to our three excellent musicians, Zayla, Justin, and Kashif.
Merci.
We are in the final week of our month-long festival. Get information on the beautiful people around the world that are collaborating to make the festival happen. Check out our schedule and register for our upcoming event, upcoming conversations and activities at our website, www.theblackconsciousnessfestival.com. You can also access info on our Facebook page, YouTube channel, Instagram profile, Twitter, and LinkedIn pages. Have a good night, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, and walk in pride, power, and practice.